Do you remember the first time you got your heart broken? Most of us have been through a breakup or a loss that left us totally devastated. So painful that it literally feels like things will never get better. But after some time to heal, we can see the joy in life again and the light at the end of the tunnel. That wasn't the case for Alan Ionov, who claims that he was driven to total madness after he and his long-term girlfriend parted ways. What Alan did to deal with his heartbreak was not only terrible, but deadly. Let's dive in. To get to the root of this story, we aren't going to look at what kind of person Alan Ionov was before this happened, but rather his main intended victim, Anna Bowie. Born in 1997, Anna was raised in Everett, Washington by her parents, who described her as someone who was joyful and caring. She loved to hang out with her friends and wanted to do something with her life that would allow her to give back to people. She went to Kamiak High School and was said to be an excellent student who participated in the school choir. A lot of people remember her for being a beautiful singer. This is where she also met Alan Ionov, and the two started dating. Safe to say she had no idea what she was getting into. Anna and Alan dated for a pretty long time, and he would later say she was the first girl he ever kissed and was ever in love with. They seemed like a totally normal couple. They even went on trips together, like Disneyland. They both graduated from high school in 2015 and enrolled in the University of Washington. Anna was hoping to become a nursing assistant, and Alan was majoring in computer science and engineering. Somewhere down the line, their relationship stopped working for whatever reason. This happens for a lot of young couples. People change as they go from teens to adults, and sometimes things just fizzle out, you know? But here's the part that makes this case even crazier. Alan was the one to end things. Why is that important, you might be asking? Well, after their relationship ended, Alan started acting really strange, while Anna was out there living her best life. You can see from her Instagram that in the few months before she passed away, she was having the best time traveling the world in the summer after finishing her first year at college. It's so sad to see how full of life she was, knowing what happened to her just a short time after she posted her last picture. As we now know, Alan was in a totally different place to Anna. Reportedly, after the breakup, his mental health started to really go downhill, and he started acting impulsively and aggressively. He talked often about being jealous of Anna and any other guys in his life. Things got so bad that he even thought about his life. Now, here's something important to remember that makes me super mad. His parents knew that he was struggling. Apparently, for a long time, he'd struggled with mental illness and even been to a specialist before because he threatened to do something to harm himself. The specialist said that it was super important for Alan to get some help, but he and his mom decided against it. Things got noticeably worse for Alan after the breakup, which is pretty ironic, and even though those close to him knew he was on a downward spiral, no one did anything to help him. That isn't to say I think his mental health justifies what he did, because it definitely does not. However, could it have been prevented if someone took notice and got him the help he clearly needed? Absolutely. The month before the horrifying event that would destroy so many lives, Alan bought a gun, an AR-15 to be exact. An AR-15 is a semi-automatic rifle that can fire a lot of bullets in short bursts and can do a lot of damage in the wrong hands. The scary thing is, despite his mental state and history of mental illness, Alan had no trouble buying the gun and taking it home that same day. His parents both knew about his strange purchase, and all they did was call the store to ask if he could return it, but they never did. Time went by, and as Anna's life was just getting started, Alan had already made plans to destroy it. On July 30th, 2016, a bunch of people from their high school class were going to a house party in Mukilteo, including Anna. In the days leading up to the party, Alan sent some pretty disturbing texts to a friend of his and pretty much told him he planned to turn up to the party with his new weapon, calling himself a future shooter. Reportedly, Alan tried one last thing before going forward with his deadly plan. On July 29th, he tried to get back together with Anna, but she rejected him, which makes sense considering he was the one who ended things. On that same day, she posted her last photo to Instagram, a selfie of her and her friend out kayaking. No idea what was about to happen. On the day of the party, Alan texted the same friend as before and said he was going to go there and shoot everyone. The friend clearly didn't take his threat seriously because instead of calling for help, he told Alan to go and hunt deer instead of thinking about Anna. Alan said no, he'd made the decision. He pulled up to the party that night in his car and apparently just sat there for about 2 hours. In that time, he watched people at the party and literally read the instruction manual for the gun, which goes to show just how unprepared he was for this. He'd even told his friend he planned to get gun safety lessons so he didn't mess up. He sent one last text to his friend saying he was going to start shooting in 2 minutes, but sat in the car for a further 90 minutes. He decided to go forward with his plan after he spotted Anna, who was talking to another guy. He got out of the car, walked up to the house, and opened fire. 3 people lost their lives that night, including Anna. Jacob Long was 19. He stumbled across Alan as he was creeping up to the house and died due to 3 bullet injuries in his back. His next 2 victims were also just outside the house. Will Kramer managed to flee the scene, despite also obtaining a bullet in his back, and hid further away from the house and managed to call the police. Jordan Ebner wasn't so lucky. He also died outside the house and was discovered on a walkway just a few feet from Jacob. Then, Alan went into the house and found Anna sitting at the kitchen table. He didn't even hesitate before firing at her and hitting her straight in the head. Finally, he went up to the balcony outside the main bedroom and fired his weapon at anyone he could see outside before he ran out of ammo and ran. Amazingly, he didn't injure anyone else. Alan got back in his car and sped away from the scene, making it 100 miles before he was caught by the police and arrested 90 minutes after the incident.
God, please forgive me. God, please let me die.
He was arrested on 3 counts of aggravated murder, but that isn't the end of the story. After being found guilty on all counts, Alan decided to give a statement at his sentencing, and what he had to say shocked a lot of people.
However, I'd like everyone to hear loud and clear that it was the ease of acquiring a gun that enabled me to act on my emotions.
In his speech, it seemed like Alan really wasn't interested in taking responsibility for his actions. He blamed it on his mental health, on his uncontrolled emotions, even on the devil. But whatever he admitted to, he also made sure to mention that it wasn't entirely his fault. This angered a lot of people. The families of those that were injured and lost their lives made speeches too, and nobody had anything favorable to say about Alan.
It appears to me that Mr. Ivanov was raised as a spoiled brat, that he was given whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it.
But what was clearer than anything was just how heartbroken the whole community was over the loss of these lives and the impact it would have on them forever.
He loved his friend so much, and then there's a coward with a gun comes and takes it all away.
Despite requests from some family members for Alan to receive capital punishment, he was sentenced to life behind bars without the possibility of parole. That means he will never leave prison again. Anna's family filed a lawsuit against Alan's parents, claiming there were things they could have done to prevent this from happening. Her family also started a scholarship program to honor Anna's memory, giving other students the opportunity to travel the world just as she had done before she passed away.
I try to think about what she would want for us if she was here today. She wouldn't want us to be sad.
Do you believe that someone can be truly evil? Well, you might after hearing this story. There are people in the world capable of doing terrible things, but it isn't often we come across someone willing to commit acts so corrupt and cruel that their actions don't even sound real. This is the story of Rachel Burkheimer, the girl who watched the man she loved dig her grave before he took her life.
It was really senseless and it didn't need to happen, and it was just a horrible, horrible thing.
Rachel Rose Burkheimer was born on January 18, 1984, in Everett, Washington. She grew up with her parents, Bill and Denise, and her sister, Megan. They all loved each other so much, and Rachel was the definition of perfect. She was always smiling, happy, and loved animals, aspiring to become a vet one day. While her childhood was happy for the most part, Rachel ran into some difficulties once she became a teen, and honestly, none of it was her fault. When she was in high school, Rachel lost not 1, not 2, but 6 of her friends. Can you imagine how awful that must have been? Being a teen is hard enough without having to go through so much loss. One friend took their own, another drowned, and another died in an accidental shooting. But the one that impacted Rachel the most was the passing of Corey Haynes, her best friend who tragically died in a car accident. Growing up, Rachel and Corey were totally inseparable, and they treated each other like brother and sister. Rachel's dad believes that they were soulmates, and he was just a really awesome person. With all this devastation in her life, Rachel's happy, smiley personality started to crumble, and she became a shadow of her former self. Unable to focus on the future anymore, her grades dropped. She started to go out partying a lot, doing things no one ever expected someone like her to do. Her family was seriously worried about her, and they were right to be. She dropped out of school and started hanging around with a group who calls themselves the Northwest Mafia, a small-time gang of mostly teens who dabbled in petty crimes and were constantly in and out of jail. Her parents only discovered just how deep Rachel was in this group when they got a phone bill of over $600 for calls Rachel made to a correctional facility in a nearby Shelton. Who the heck was their teenage daughter talking to in jail? The answer was a young man named John Anderson. John was one of the guys in this gang who was constantly in and out of jail for minor crimes, even enough to give him a reputation, but not enough to get him locked up for long. What became obvious quickly was that he was totally obsessed with Rachel, who only saw the good in him. When he got out of jail and started dating properly, things started going downhill real fast. Anytime they hung out, John would literally smell Rachel's clothes and hair to make sure she didn't smell like another guy. What a total creep, right? Before long, there were signs that things were more severe than just jealousy. Rachel was always turning up with weird bruises on her body, and her family got scared that John was hurting her. After a long talk with her sister about how toxic their relationship was, Rachel decided to break things off with John, much to the relief of her parents. While Megan believed John was just an annoying loser, always getting into trouble, she didn't like how he treated her sister, and she was very supportive of her breaking up with him and encouraged Rachel to keep away from him for good.
When she left my room that night, I'll never forget, she closed the door, and for a split second, something went off in my head, and it just said, but what if?
Pretty soon after, they started to see parts of the old Rachel emerging again, and she seemed happy and relaxed again. But it wouldn't last long. Around this time, she got close with one of the other guys in the gang, 18-year-old Maurice Rivas. Their relationship was never romantic, but they became really close friends after Rachel broke up with John. Maurice had a tough start in life, growing up living with his grandparents or in foster care. Like Rachel, he was sick and tired of wasting his life with the gang and wanted something different for himself. So they inspired each other to become better people. They both enrolled back in school to get their diplomas, and while things were starting to look up, Rachel had no idea she was actually in a lot of danger. After breaking up with John, she started seeing one of his close friends, which made John furious. On top of that, there was a rumor going around that Rachel was giving out gang secrets to her friends and members of rival gangs. While this has never been confirmed, the rumor was enough for the Northwest Mafia to hatch a plan against her. On the night of September 27th, 2002, Rachel went with Maurice to a party held by the Northwest Mafia. Even though she distanced herself from the gang, she wasn't worried about anyone being mean to her because she was with Maurice, who was still hanging out with them. Everything seemed totally normal, and they were having a good time until John arrived. For some reason, when he got to the party and saw everyone was already having a great time without him, John got really mad. He started getting aggressive with a couple of the guys there, and things escalated until weapons were drawn. At this point, Rachel decided it was time to leave, and she tried to leave the house. Unfortunately, she never made it to the door. It turned out the whole night, inviting her to the party, John turning up and getting angry, was all a part of an elaborate plan to scare and hurt Rachel. As soon as she tried to leave, all the guys knocked her to the floor and started kicking her, including Maurice. Once she was basically unconscious, they tied her up and put her in the garage. It seems that that was as far as they planned, because after that, they couldn't decide what to do next. They thought about doing a lot of awful things to her, and when they couldn't decide, they just ordered pizza and played video games instead. It really shows how messed up these people were that they could just hang out like buddies after doing that to another person. And you know what, guys? That isn't even the worst part. The worst part is that she almost had the chance to escape this awful situation. Rachel could have been alive today. Trissa Connor, who co-leased the house with her then boyfriend, the alleged gang leader, was shocked when she came home to find Rachel tied up in her garage. Her first instinct was to help. She untied Rachel and tried to ask her what her name was and if she was okay. Unfortunately, the guys heard her come in. They entered the garage and made Trissa go into the house. Instead of going upstairs to call the cops and get help for Rachel, Trissa simply told the group to get Rachel out of her home. So that's what they did. They put Rachel into a gym bag and then put her in the trunk of one of their cars. Still not totally sure what they would do, they thought about getting a hotel room and keeping Rachel there until her injuries were healed. That wasn't what happened. The solution they settled on was far less merciful. 4 of the guys from the party, including John and Maurice, got in the car and started driving towards the mountains before stopping 30 miles away from town. They took Rachel out of the bag and left her with Maurice while they went to get supplies. Supplies for what, you ask? To dig a grave. What's so sad about this is that according to Maurice, by this point, Rachel had already accepted she wasn't going to survive the night. She told him she knew she was going to die and that she begged him that if that was the case, that she didn't want to be drowned. And even though he definitely had the chance to while everyone else was gone, Maurice never took the opportunity to try and free Rachel. It's crazy that at least 2 people had the opportunity to save this poor girl. When the others got back, they'd brought shovels. As they started digging, they made Rachel take all of her clothes and jewelry off, even a ring that she had gotten from a deceased friend that she begged to keep on. They refused. She knelt down in the grave and started praying. Then John started firing his weapon and didn't stop until he ran out of bullets. It took 10 days for her body to be discovered, and the police were concerned they'd never find out what happened. He knew that the gang was somehow involved, and because of that, people would be reluctant to give up information. However, one of the younger members confessed to his mom about what happened that night, and she told the cops everything. After they found Rachel, they discovered her clothes, jewelry, and shovel at the bottom of a pond. With all the evidence piling up, they started bringing people in for questioning, and eventually, they all turned in on each other. Rachel's family was heartbroken. They couldn't believe that their sweet, wonderful daughter had met such a violent end at the hands of a guy who claimed to love her. What hurt more was the fact that there were several opportunities to help her, but no one was brave enough to speak up against John. In the end, 8 people were convicted in Rachel's murder, including John and Maurice. Maurice was sentenced to 25 years and 10 months in prison after pleading guilty to first-degree homicide. His lawyer claimed that he was too afraid to speak up, and that's why he didn't help Rachel. The judge said that Maurice's fear was not comparable to the suffering Rachel endured that night, and Maurice knows he can never make up for what he'd done.
It was really senseless, and it didn't need to happen, and it was just a horrible, horrible thing.
John was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He has shown little regret for anything he did, other than the fact that he got caught. Apparently, before his arrest, he laughed about what he did to Rachel, even telling one friend, "You should have seen her head explode." According to Megan, Rachel's sister, he even smirked and winked at her family during the trial. Can you believe how disgusting this guy is? Despite appealing his sentence, John and the others are behind bars to this day and are unlikely to get out anytime soon. Can you guys imagine how hard this must have been on Rachel's family to suffer losing her and then have to listen to the details of that night in 8 separate trials? It must have been totally traumatizing. Even with all the pain they've been made to endure, Rachel's family decided to do something positive with the new platform they had. Rachel's dad, Bill, began working to create new laws around helping injured people. He wanted to illegalize refusing care to someone who is visibly injured. If that law had been in place on the night Rachel died, she probably would have been alive today. He also spoke at the 2007 National Day of Remembrance for Murder Victims, declaring it a day where victims' families could be free to heal, comfort one another, and try to find peace. This day shall be a day of grief relief. All survivors get a 1-day pass on pain, and no monsters can whisper in their ears. Rest in peace, Rachel Burkheimer. You might have noticed that it is often the least likely people who get hurt by people around them. In this sad case from 2018, a student nurse was almost too nice to notice some huge red flags. But was there any way for her to escape her fate? Let's find out.
I mostly remember her laugh and just her presence.
Look who I found!
She was always the one who was the most sensitive and supportive friend ever.
Haley Anderson had a big future ahead of her. In 2018, she had nearly finished her last year of nursing training at Binghamton Medical School, and she really wanted to help other people. As a top student, she already had a job lined up for when she graduated in May that year. So she had a bright future ahead of her, and she really didn't want to be tied down to any serious relationship until she graduated. She had a few on and off relationships, and the guys she got involved with mostly understood that.
Oh, she's such a free spirit. She was a millennial hippie. The way she dressed, her hair, her personality, the way she was with her friends. She trusted everybody, she talked to everybody.
At least, that was what she thought. On March 8th, 2018, Haley went out partying with her friends. After she'd left them later that night, the last message they received from her was about 3:15 a.m. And after that, and for the whole of the next day, there was total radio silence. At first, they assumed that she was just sleeping off her hangover. They'd had a lot to drink. But by the evening of March 9th, her roommates and her friends were super worried. She still hadn't answered any calls or messages. She was meant to see her friend Josie's poetry reading that evening, but she never showed up for that. And Haley really wasn't a person that flaked. By the morning of March 10th, her roommates, Josie and Rochella, were so worried that they used the Find My Friends phone app to track her down. Haley's phone showed up at the location of an ex-boyfriend's house. For a moment, her friends actually wondered if they'd run away to get married. So Haley's friends went to the student apartment where they hoped to find her, or at least some reason why she hadn't answered. They were so worried that they even climbed in through a window to search for her. Yeah, they're pretty badass. They probably just expected to find a passed out Haley or at least her phone, but it was something much worse. Her roommate, Josie Artin, said,
And I walk in there and then I see Orlando's bedroom and Haley is there. I didn't know for sure that she was dead at the time. She just was so pale, you know?
I can't imagine how scary that was. They immediately called 911. But who would have done this to poor Haley? And what had happened to her on the night she went missing? They didn't have to look far to find the answer. What had happened to Haley that night? Remember how I said Haley was kind of a free spirit? Well, in between her relationships, she'd gotten involved with another nursing student who she shared a lot of classes with. This guy was Orlando Enrique Terquero Moreno. Orlando was born in Miami, but had grown up in Nicaragua before studying nursing in the US. He and Haley had known each other for a while, but they officially got intimate after a party in 2017. This was during Haley's 4th year at college while she was on a break from her regular boyfriend, Kevin. Now, she'd made it very clear to Orlando that this was just a fling, but he never saw it the same way. They fought all the time. One of her friends said,
Sometimes they were bickering, sometimes they weren't, and other times they would laugh hysterically and I could hear from my room.
Okay, every relationship has its ups and downs, but there was also a lot of red flags. For a start, he guilt-tripped her about being kicked out of a fraternity, which he and her ex, Kevin Ocampo, were a part of. But whenever she tried to make him see it was over, Orlando just got worse.
He used to stop by a lot to come smoke a cigarette on our porch. He definitely used to drive by because he was jealous. He just didn't want to see someone else over there. He was clearly weirdly possessive of Haley.
The biggest red flag was when someone slashed every single one of Haley's car tires after a night out. Kevin Ocampo, her on-off boyfriend, saw the tires and had no doubt about who had done it. Everybody knew it was Orlando. But Haley didn't want to press criminal charges because that would mean he'd lose his scholarship at college. Well, that's very sweet of her, and it makes what happened to her even more tragic. Autopsy results showed that someone ended her life using their hands and the necklace she was wearing. This was really only one person who could have done it, and he was about to take a very cowardly way to escape his crime. Of course, the police searched for Orlando right away. Looking around his student house, they could see he'd tried to take his own life. There was a necktie attached to some hooks in the basement of the student house, and there was blood on the floor. Putting it together with some CCTV footage and a note apologizing to his family for doing something stupid, they figured that he'd fallen to the floor after taking some sleeping medication and hurt his head when he landed. He had also sent a worrying text message to his sister in Nicaragua. This message had worried her enough to ask the local police to check his house, all while Haley was still lifeless in the bedroom. They didn't get any answer that time, but Haley's friends broke in less than an hour later and finally raised the alarm. Orlando looked guilty as heck, and a manhunt began. The cops traced him really fast, but there was bad news. This creep had made a run for it. After failing to end his own life in the basement, he'd driven directly to JFK Airport. You can see the bandage on his head from the fall. He just barely missed a flight to Miami, his birthplace, but then must have decided to fly even further away. So now, the main suspect was hiding out in Nicaragua in South America. The coward had run back to his home turf. Trying to get Orlando out of Nicaragua was going to be a very difficult thing because he had dual citizenship. Stephen Cornwell, Brome County's district attorney, was heading up the case. He was really worried that getting any justice for poor Haley would be impossible.
I thought we had a snowball's chance in hell of getting a conviction.
The first trick would be to even catch Orlando, now that he'd left the country. Orlando was picked up at a hospital in Managua, where he'd gone to get that head injury and some self-inflicted wounds checked out. The local police quickly arrested and charged him. After a lot of intense discussion, both the US and Nicaragua made a compromise. Although Orlando would not be sent back to the US, he would go on trial in his other homeland. That country's Justice Department also charged Orlando with femicide, a specific type of homicide in which a woman is murdered on account of her gender. This crime doesn't even exist in the US, but it's been used in Latin America ever since 2012, and it carries a very heavy penalty. The trial finally started in October 2019. In another difference from the US, there was no jury in the court, just a single judge who listened to the evidence from America over the remote camera feed.
He would not stop texting her and following her and driving by her house.
Haley's friends and family highlighted how possessive he'd been, and of course they brought up the tire slashing. I mean, he was pretty impossible to defend, even if he often acted like he was bored, like he was going to get away with it. Then Orlando's defense attorney tried an insanity defense, which barely even works in the movies. The only witness in Orlando's team was a psychiatrist, but all that guy could tell them was that Orlando seemed fine now. No sign of losing his mind there. So that wasn't really helpful at all. Then Haley's mom got to deliver the closing statement.
Haley was a beautiful, intelligent, and friendly girl. She was an aspiring nurse and had her whole life to look forward to. She was and still is my best friend.
After all that evidence, a jury would normally debate the case for at least a day or two. But just 90 short minutes after the trial ended, the judge came back with a verdict. And nobody expected the result. The judge confirmed that Orlando was completely guilty.
I hope that you get the highest amount of years behind bars because you deserve even more than that.
She got her wish. Orlando was handed the maximum 30 years in jail. Leaving the US had totally backfired because it's likely that he'd received a much lighter sentence if he stuck around. Instead, he's serving time in a prison with some horrible overcrowding. And he'll live on one small meal of rice and beans per day, unless his mom can deliver more food to him. No wonder he tried to get his sentence reduced in 2022. His appeal put Haley's family through the traumatic process all over again, and it looked like he might not serve the full 30 years. In March of 2022, Orlando's appeal went in front of 3 magistrates. He used the same defense attorney as before, and the guy wheeled out a different psychiatrist this time. But guess what? They tried the same argument as before, insisting that Orlando simply hadn't been in his right mind when he hurt Haley. Once again, the head shrinker reported that there was no sign of this. Orlando seemed perfectly sane. Are you getting some deja vu? Because this all seems very familiar. It's not shocking that the entire appeal got ditched. So thankfully, Orlando's going to rot in that prison until he finishes his time. But what happens then? Could he come back to the States?
If, for some reason, he was released, the entire case can be tried here on behalf of the family.
At least Haley received some kind of justice. It's so awful that she was so close to her bright future, only for someone like this to tear it all away. While waiting for the trial, they put Haley to rest. Then, a couple of months later, Haley's dad, Gordon Anderson, collected her nursing diploma at the graduation ceremony.
Accepting on behalf of Haley Anderson.
It was probably the saddest day. Just walk in and there's a picture of her on a chair.
Now, Haley is finally at peace in her old bedroom.
This is Haley right here. She's in here.
And her mom hopes that the attention from Haley's case will help a lot more people who could be in danger.
And also to all of the people who see red flags, to make sure you follow through and take them very seriously to help prevent these things from happening.
What do you think about this case? Were Orlando's friends right, or was he always this bad and just kept it hidden? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below.